Chapter 81. I'll fly you up to Jiangnan on my private plane. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 81. I'll fly you up to Jiangnan on my private plane, then you get up, or I'll dissect you. Okay. I'll fly you up to Jiangnan on my private plane. Yun-shi stared at him as if she was looking at a dimwit. I'll just take the train. I don't want to bother you. If he flew, she was afraid of getting shot down. I'm not so busy lately. I have the time. He didn't care whether she agreed or not. He'd decided for her. Come to the mountain tomorrow morning. We'll go directly to Jiangnan. What about what you promised, about not meddling or interfering? Don't get so nervous. I won't meddle or interfere with what you want to do. I'm just getting you there and back in the quickest manner. He stood up and pulled her up from the bed. School starts tomorrow. Go early and come back early. During your last year of studies, your grades have to be very good. That's an unnecessary worry. My dad doesn't even worry about that. Mu Feiqi chuckled and changed the topic. You run every morning not just to improve your physique, right? You are athletic, but you aren't fast enough. You want to improve your strength. Starting tomorrow, come up at night, and I will show you how to train. I still have to study. I don't have time. She did want to improve her strength, but she didn't intend on having too much involvement with him. If she did agree, there would be ceaseless entanglements waiting in the future. You will have free time. He rubbed her head and pointed to the 2 steel balls in the corner. Those 2 gadgets are for you. I'm leaving now. I'll wait for you at the top of the mountain tomorrow morning. Standing at the window, Yun-shi watched him slide down along the sewer pipe and then climb down the 3-story wall. The agility and flexibility he displayed impressed her greatly. He was this country's experienced and admirable young Marshal Mu. He had endured so much hardship, yet he had still managed to return in triumph. If he would really help her with her training, it really would save her a lot of trouble in the future. However, she still needed to consider it carefully. As soon as Grandpa Yun came home, he heard all the news about Yun Xiling, and he became so infuriated that he immediately rebuked Liang Shiqin for being so full of herself. Yun Xiling had tried to take advantage of Yun-shi's friendship with the Qin family and went to the Qin family's house. Using such obvious opportunistic and ambitious motives, how would others see the Yun family? Furthermore, Yun Xiling had also smashed Mrs. Chen's antique vase. Regardless of whether or not they would pay for the exorbitant vase, going to someone's house without an invitation was already quite offensive. From now on, don't even think about trying to exploit Yun-shi's relationship with the Qin family. The Qin family treats her like a lifesaver because they respect her. Have you guys no shame? With you so eager to be obsequious, you have brought me shame. Grandpa. It's not all my fault. My sister didn't even care about the honor and disgrace of the Yun family. I was so embarrassed today, but not only did she not help me, she also, you got what you deserved. What does the Qin family have to do with you? Yet you went to their door on behalf of the Yun family. Are you so high and mighty, or is the Yun family so high and mighty? Don't forget, they are one of the 4 most distinguished families in Jingdu. They are not ordinary people. The old man was really absolutely exasperated by the shamelessness of Liang Shiqin and her daughter, and he snorted coldly and then turned to head upstairs. Grandpa. Yun Xiling became anxious when she saw that Grandpa did not seem like he would help. In terms of the millions in compensation, it was bad enough that her father had reprimanded them, but if he didn't help pay the compensation, where would they get the money to repay Mrs. Chen? If they didn't pay the compensation and word got out, they wouldn't be able to remain in this social circle in the future. She wanted to marry a wealthy man and get ahead of the other socialites, so she couldn't lose her foothold without a fight. Mom, what should we do? Mrs. Chen could decide to ostracize us and we could be kicked out of the upper class. We'll have no chance if that happens. I don't want to be looked down upon by that group of women, and even more, I don't want to feel beneath them. You must help me. After being scolded by the old man, Liang Shuqin was feeling deeply resentful inside. She blamed that wretched Yun Shi for bringing her so much trouble. She could have solved the problem easily by putting in a few good words with Mrs. Chen, but instead, she chose to bring it home and get payback against them. How heartless she was. Don't worry, Mom will think of a way. No matter what, you are still her sister, and Mrs. Chen will have to let this thing go eventually. Because if we suffer, that wretched girl won't be any better off either. Mrs. Chen understands this. Then hurry up and find a way. Liang Shuqin felt exasperated as she racked her brains for an idea. Soon, she raised her head to ask, "Did you see the old lady this time at the Chen family's house?" "No, I didn't even enter the villa. I got kicked out in the courtyard." "That's good then. Don't worry, we still have a chance." Chapter 82. The start of a good show. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 82. The start of a good show. On the first day of school, Liang Sini got up early to doll herself up. Transferring to Jingdu in her junior year of high school was a new start for her. She must seize every opportunity. Yun Xiling was in her sophomore year, and Yun Chuhan was in her freshman year, so, unlike Liang Sini who was looking forward to school with anticipation and excitement, the two of them were numb to it all. However, as soon as they saw Yun Shi coming down the stairs, both of them were intrigued. They knew it would be the start of a good show. Both had heard from Liang Sini about Yun Shi's grades in the countryside. However, unlike the education system in Muyang Town, the education curriculum in Jingdu was much more rigorous and advanced. Yun Yuanfeng had always paid attention to their academic achievements. After all, it was something to show off. If they had good grades, Yun Yuanfeng would look good in front of the others in the villa complex. They didn't think that Yun Shi would act so arrogantly at home if her grades got worse. As Yun Shi came downstairs, she saw that they all had mischief in their eyes and remembered that she started school today. She soon guessed what they were gloating about. All right, she'd show them. Although she had been out of school for several years, the academic curriculum for year 3 of high school wasn't going to be too difficult for her. She still had time to review the mathematical formulas, and her Chinese could be recited from memory. English wouldn't be a problem. In her last life, she'd worked hard on her English skills in order to translate the complicated words of foreign medicines. With obscure medical terms, one bad translation could cause an entire prescription to become invalid. In comparison, high school junior level English was a piece of cake. As for history, chemistry, physics, biology, and politics, she really considered them beneath her consideration. In her last life, she'd originally wanted to be a doctor. However, Liang Shuqin and Yun Yuanfeng had felt that dealing with the dead every day was an unfortunate ambition, and thus her dream of becoming a doctor hadn't worked out. Later, she studied and researched medicine for an entire year. Chemistry, chemical reagents, biological anatomy, and gene chains were all basic to her. She didn't mind reviewing it. They wanted a good show, so they could wait and see a good show. Yun Yuanfeng was about to go to work, and asked Yun Shi if she wanted him to take her to the train station. Yun Shi thought about it but refused. "I'll just take the villa complex's bus." "Dad, you should take my sisters to school first." "Okay, then be careful. Come back early." "Understood." There was only one private car at home. No one would take them to school if Yun Yuanfeng drove straight to work. Yun Xiling was proud, so naturally she wanted to arrive to school by car on the first day of school. Yun Shi didn't intend to join in on their excitement, and, besides, their car couldn't squeeze in the 4 of them. Only after they left did Yun Shi go up the mountain. There was already a car waiting at the sentry post. The guard saw Yun Shi coming and saluted her politely. "Miss Yun, young Marshal Mu instructed us to take you up the mountain." "Thank you." Sitting in the car, she turned to look at the young man in the driver's seat with a little curiosity. Are you all young Marshal Mu's subordinates? We are all the people he trained by himself. We are the ones who protect him. After defeating 5 sentry posts, Yun Shi had become famous throughout the Tianyu mountain area. Everyone was a little curious and wanted to find out more about the little girl. After all, socialites and heiresses of her age in Jingdu were busy learning how to doll themselves up and how to throw parties. Yet as soon as she'd come onto the scene, she'd fought single-handedly and had the boldness to venture onto Tianyu Mountain. She was truly impressive. Young Marshal Mu is really underestimating all of your potential by making you guys guard the mountain gates. The man smiled, but said nothing. He didn't complain or brag. Yun Shi was a bit surprised. It was indeed true that what kind of subordinates one had depended on what kind of boss one was. As they approached the top of the mountain, Yun Shi regarded the figure waiting on the tarmac. A private jet for a single person. How domineering and impressive. Mu Feiqi was wearing a beige linen shirt, khaki trousers, and white casual shoes. The shirt fit the muscles of his upper body perfectly. Chapter 83. Especially gorgeous. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 83. Especially gorgeous. After getting out of the car, Yun Shi walked slowly toward him. The man leaning against the plane had handsome features with defined contours, and his piercing eyes made him appear a bit arrogant. Playing with a bunch of keys, he appeared aloof. There was an innate suave quality about him. It was the overwhelming aura of a leader in a high position. A man like him, who'd experienced all the ups and downs of the marketplace, had a sort of distant noble quality to him that was out of the commoner's league. Therefore, there were still differences between people. When the heir of a distinguished family, Chen Yichen, offered to send her to Jiangnan, he mentioned sending a car and a chauffeur. But Mu Feiqi, used to being a decision-maker, doesn't bother with any nonsense and offers to directly fly her over with his private jet. Just walking toward him made her feel like she was walking step by step toward a hunter's trap. Very dangerous. But she had no choice but to risk danger. Everything had begun to change after her rebirth. Every step she takes has to be cautious, and each step has to move her closer to victory. Mu Feiqi nonchalantly raised his eyes to look at the figure walking toward him. The clothes that she'd worn for the past few days were quite special, and today they were especially gorgeous. She had on an emerald green embroidered dress, with short sleeves and a maxi hem, covered by a white chiffon scarf. As she walked, the ruffles on the skirt appeared as if they were alive. How beautiful and fairy-like. Mu Feiqi raised his eyes and watched the elegant swaying skirt. There was undisguised awe and admiration in his eyes. There was 1 year left until she was a legal adult. Although she had grown up in the countryside, she had nice features and fair skin. In this gorgeous dress, she appeared even more beautiful. She had no jewelry on, and her hair was tied up in a bun. She appeared very refreshing, like flowers blooming after there had been rain during the night. Altogether, she was dazzling and enchanting. Young Marshal Mu, are you sure you want to? She glanced at the jet behind him. How over the top. Mu Feiqi raised his eyebrows and took out a GPS from the jet. Give me the address. She looked at the GPS in his hand. It looked as if it was an older model and resembled the ones she had come across in her previous life. You know how to use it. He unexpectedly passed it over to her. Yun Shi gave it a cursory glance, entered the address of the drugstore, and the GPS automatically searched for a place near the drugstore where he could park the jet. Mu Feiqi watched her use it skillfully. She definitely didn't look like someone who had never seen one of these before. With everything she did, she was making him more and more curious about her. Oh, the Su family pharmaceuticals. Mu Feiqi glanced at the address above his head and chuckled. You know this place as well. From how he was acting, obviously he knew of it. I know. Mu Feiqi took out his phone and dialed Su Hang. Then he helped Yun Shi onto the jet. Su Hang, we'll arrive near you in 30 minutes. Could you please come pick us up at the address I've just sent you? Over the phone, Su Hang sounded a little surprised. Boss, what are you doing coming here? I was just coming back today. Then wait a little longer. Stop blabbering on about nonsense. Without giving him the opportunity to say anything more, Mu Feiqi promptly hung up the phone. Yun Shi stared at the man as he put earphones on her ears. She asked, Young Marshal Mu, you wouldn't happen to know this shopkeeper, would you? I know the son of the family who owns this pharmaceutical company. He's my doctor. He pinched her face gently, adjusted her headphones, fastened her seat belt, and started the engine. The door closed, and as she sat in the company pilot's seat, she watched the plane take off and soar past the top of the mountain. She had never been in a jet before, and the feeling of flying over treetops felt both exotic and exciting at the same time. She turned to look at the calm, handsome man in the pilot's seat. He maneuvered the plane skillfully, as if he was merely driving a car. In front of her, he never immaturely did anything just to show off, nor did he do anything patronizing toward her. He was calm, steady, and in control. It seemed as if nothing could get in his way. Everything was under his control. Chapter 84. Peculiar Tastes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 84. Peculiar tastes. Along the way, Yun Shi watched Mu Feiqi maneuver the dashboard at the same time as she was admiring the scenery. Mu Feiqi noticed her curiosity. After they had stopped at the scheduled location, he took off his headphones and looked at her. After watching me, have you made any breakthroughs? No, would you like to learn? He questioned her with mischievous mirth in his eyes. Yun Shi thought about it, hesitated a little, then nodded, and said, yes. Perhaps piloting would become a valuable life-saving skill in the future, and there was no harm in learning a new skill. Who knew what could happen in the future? If you want to learn, after you reach adulthood, I will teach you personally. Why do you have to be the one to teach me? She didn't want to get involved with him too deeply. There was more than a year left until she became a legal adult. By that time, perhaps they would hate each other too much to speak. If I don't teach you, who else do you want to teach you? Mu Feiqi narrowed his eyes, and his voice was clear. In all of China, except me, I'm afraid you won't find a second teacher who can teach you. This was special equipment, which couldn't be used by anyone but people he chose. If she wanted to learn, then she had to pass all the levels and an exam. It wasn't an easy task. I'll think about it. She had more than a year anyway before she reached adulthood. There was no hurry. Mu Feiqi was really amused by her, and he pinched her again lightly with a helpless expression on his face. This is something others can only dream of. You're the only who dares talk to me like this. From a distance, a car drove toward them. Mu Feiqi helped Yun Shi off the plane. A white off-road vehicle stopped in front of them, and the window of the driver's seat was lowered to reveal a mischievous face. Boss. Su Hang noticed the little girl standing beside Mu Feiqi just after he opened his mouth and was slightly caught off guard. Who is she? Huh, boss, where did you kidnap this little girl from? Yun Shi looked at the man in the car. This was the son of the Su family pharmaceuticals owner. In her last life, she'd only heard that he had a son who was a doctor, but she hadn't expected to encounter him after her rebirth. Hello, my name is Yun Shi. Yun Shi. You're the Yun Shi who saved the Chen family's eldest son from the pack of wolves and dared to venture onto Tianyu Mountain. Upon hearing her name, Su Hang finally realized who she was. With wide eyes, he stared at her as if she were a ghost. It was as if he was dying to find out more about her. Well, I am Yun Shi, but I'm not as impressive as you say I am. I'm just an ordinary person. That's enough. Don't scare her off. Mu Feiqi pulled Yun Shi behind him and opened the car door to let her get in first. As soon as Yun Shi had gotten in the car, the person in the driver's seat turned and reached out. "Hello. Little Yun-shi, my name is Su Hang, and I'm very happy to meet you." "Nice to meet you also." Yun-shi was just about to reach out her hand when her wrist was caught and pulled back by the other man in the car. Mu Feiqi glanced at Su Hang coolly and ordered, "Drive." Su Hang stared down at his hand with a bewildered expression. It took a while for him to realize what was going on, and he glanced at the two people sitting in the back seat with mixed emotions before he started the car. This was terrible. Why was his boss getting so careless lately? He was even beginning to lay his hands on youngsters like her. Gee, he really does have peculiar tastes. Although they had come to buy medicine, Su Hang was surprised when he heard her mention several different kinds of medicine. "These are all traditional Chinese medicine formulas that are almost lost in our family." "How do you know about them?" "My dad rarely makes them for anyone." That I've studied medicine before, so I have some basic understanding." "Can you mix up these formulas for me?" She didn't have a laboratory or medical equipment at the moment, so she couldn't make the medicine on her own. "I can. But I think we should discuss it a bit more. I'm curious about the emergency operation you performed on the train. Even if it had been me, I wouldn't have been confident in its success." That was just an instinctive response." Mu Feiqi impatiently interrupted the two people going off on these tangents. "He can mix up whatever medical formula you want in Jingdu. There's a laboratory in his house that is bigger than this pharmaceutical shop. Just ask him for any medicine you want." Yun-shi felt at a loss for words. She turned around and said, "Why didn't you tell me earlier that he can mix up all the medical formulas in Jingdu? Why did we come here?" Chapter 85. Raising Her as Your Toy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 85. Raising Her as Your Toy. You didn't tell me that you were going for medicine at first or where you were going. How could I know it would be such a coincidence? Even after being exposed so blatantly, young Marshal Mu still remained impassive as he answered her. Yun-shi was at a loss for words, and she sighed. Sure enough, people involved in business were really calculating. Yun-shi stared at the Su family pharmaceutical sign and touched the stone lion at the door. "So where do you want to go now? Do you want to go back?" She'd started school today and had taken half a day off. If she and Liang Sini had been assigned to the same class, then there really would be a good show waiting for her tonight. "I'll take you to buy some stuff." Mu Feiqi said to Su Hang, "You must quickly prepare the things she wants. She has to go back to school today." "Boss, I can do it after I return to Jingdu. Don't worry. I'm familiar with this area. Would you like me to be your tour guide? We don't need useless people." Mu Feiqi rushed into a quaint alley with Yun-shi. Su Hang leaned on the car window and sighed helplessly as he thought to himself, "Boss, you have to see who this is. This girl isn't even mature yet. Are you perhaps planning on raising her as your toy?" Thinking of this possibility, Su Hang shivered and goosebumps rose on his body. Even he himself was frightened by his own ideas. In her last life, Yun-shi had come to Jiangnan solely for the purpose of getting medicine and couldn't look around as she was doing now. Mu Feiqi's idea of taking her to buy some stuff meant nothing more than eating and buying things non-stop. This was probably the most relaxed and happiest she had been at any time in her 2 lifetimes. She could eat, drink, and play without restraint or having to come up with Machiavellian schemes or constantly watch her back. Perhaps, after she had finished dealing with the Yun family, she would no longer have such an innocent emotional state. However, now, as she ate the sweet osmanthus cake, she looked up at the gentle man in front of her. Although he was such an insufferably arrogant man, he really was pleasing to the eye. "That's enough, don't eat too much. I'll take you out to lunch later." He raised his hand and touched her head. It was rare to see her eating so excitedly, like a child. Yun-shi sat back and glared at him as she bit her lip. Your tone is that of one speaking to a daughter. I am not your daughter. I really want to raise a daughter, but I don't have the patience. He chuckled softly and led her into a quaint old mansion. A copper bell was at the door. He rang it, and the person who opened the door was a tough-looking, tomboyish woman. She had crisp short hair, dark green long boots, and the allure of her eyes was concealed by her heavy eye makeup. Yun-shi could tell that this handsome girl with the punk vibe was special at first sight. Young Marshal M. Upon seeing who was at the door, the woman stood up straight and nodded at him courteously. Xylan, your holiday is over. Ha! Is there a task? Li Xylan appeared disgruntled, but the thought of a task awaiting raised her spirits. Mu Feiqi patted the head of the young girl beside him. She is your task. What? Li Xylan stared at the little girl standing beside him, looking her up and down. Her face was full of disdain. Why are you throwing me a kid that hasn't even hit puberty yet? Come back to Tianyu Mountain and teach her all the skills you have learned. Just her. Li Xylan thought she was yet another wealthy socialite who had gotten in through connections. She looks like a goody two-shoes. I don't have the time to be her nanny. Her name is Yun-shi. Are you interested in her now? I've brought her here and came all the way to ask you personally to do it. What? Upon hearing her name, Li Xylan finally started taking the young girl seriously. She is the girl who fought off the pack of wolves and went into the mountains alone. How come she doesn't look like someone who could do that? With such a small body, I could knock her down with one punch. Then you can try to. Mu Feiqi gazed at her with a mirthful expression, then glanced at the calm, yet cunning, little fox. The scene of these two foxes fighting would be something to look forward to. Chapter 86. Who said that I'm not picky? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 86. Who said that I'm not picky? Facts have proven that underestimating an enemy can be deadly. Although Li Xylan had heard about Yun-shi's reputation in Tianyu Mountain, after seeing her in person, she really couldn't take her seriously. She was underestimating the enemy, but Yun-shi dared not do the same. The ferocity of the woman's gaze spoke to how capable she was. Therefore, when Li Xylan proposed to have a match against her to see whether or not she was worthy of personal lessons, Yun-shi agreed without hesitation. There were still many things she had to learn. Mu Feiqi asking someone to teach her could be very beneficial for her. Since Mu Feiqi hadn't said that he would personally teach her, it meant that he had more qualified people working for him who could do it. Such a person probably would have expertise and capabilities that rivaled his. After just a few rounds, Yun-shi and Li Xylan were evenly tied. Li Xylan was secretly surprised. Although the little girl wasn't quite agile enough, she did have stamina. In terms of her moves, some of them she hadn't seen before, and some were completely unexpected. Interesting. Besides young Marshal Mu, this girl was the only one who had been able to hold her own in 3 rounds against her. Young Marshal Mu has always been extremely discreet and hard to read, so of course she couldn't think that she was actually more capable than him. But this little girl wasn't the same and actually quite worthy of personal training. After a few moves, Yun-shi gradually became overwhelmed. This woman was really impressive. Those on the mountain went easy on her, but this woman didn't. She was basically using 70% of her strength and ferocity. As Li Xylan's fist was about to smash into her face, Yun-shi's eyes widened, but she was unable to dodge it. She was about to deflect it when a hand quickly stopped the oncoming fist. If you hurt her, I'm going to have to settle accounts with you. Mu Feiqi's big palm had blocked Li Xylan's fist, and he moved Yun-shi backward. Li Xylan glanced at the two of them. She looked at Yun-shi, who was breathless, and then looked at young Marshal Mu, who was protecting his little calf. Women were naturally perceptive, and Li Xylan grasped it all at once. Stopping in her tracks, Li Xylan chuckled softly. Huh, boss, you really aren't a picky eater. He really could lay his hands on such a little girl. She thought that it would take an extremely promiscuous seductress to attract His Highness's attention. She had never expected him to be attracted to a little girl. Mu Feiqi raised his hand and patted Yun Shi's back to put her at ease, then stared into the eyes of the little girl deeply. His lips curled into a sneering smile. Who said that I'm not picky? All right, I accept this girl. But I have conditions. Tell me what they are, Yun Shi asked. After familiarizing herself with Li Xilan's skills, Yun Shi had more respect for her. When she encountered someone of superior capabilities, she regarded them with respect. No matter how rough I go on her, you can't ask or feel bad for her, or else don't come to me. From the looks of his doting expression and how protective he was, how could she be able to teach otherwise? Only a stern master can create a skilled disciple. If he keeps on spoiling her like this, a problem will arise someday. If he wants to indulge her, then she shouldn't be learning. If he wants her to learn, then he has to let go. If she doesn't learn her techniques properly and becomes the laughingstock of the entire Tianyu Mountain, the responsibility will be all on him, not her. I promise. Just as Mu Feiqi was about to say that she was being unreasonable, Yun Shi readily agreed. Mu Feiqi looked at Yun Shi and didn't know how to react as he said helplessly, "Little thing, why are you in such a hurry? You avoided it this time, but you'll have to face it sooner or later. She can be even more ruthless than a man. As long as it's fair and square, I don't care if she's ruthless. After she'd been reborn, the best thing she'd learned was how to be ruthless. Only if she's ruthless enough can she win step by step." Chapter 87. The future wife of the Mu family heir. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 87. The future wife of the Mu family heir saying that it was fine as long as it was fair and square made Li Xilan view Yun Shi in a new light. When they flew back to Tianyu Mountain there were 2 more people and a bunch of snacks in the cabin. Upon seeing a bunch of girly items, Li Xilan was disgusted. She had never seen young Marshal Mu, who had always been so aloof, act so intimate and doting toward anyone. She was contemplating how she should train the little girl the entire way. She couldn't stunt her growth or taint her innocence, and she had to be wary of young Marshal Mu's protectiveness. She'd really received a hot potato, but for some reason she didn't want to throw it away. When they arrived back at Tianyu Mountain, Yun Shi had to leave. She had classes in the afternoon, so she had to rush off to school. Mu Feiqi asked the butler to move the stuff from the jet into the mansion and took the car key. I have informed your homeroom teacher and the principal that you're on the way. I'll take you to school now. Ednel.co. No. Let me go by myself. Young Marshal Mu, you're too noticeable. I don't want everyone talking about it. Mu Feiqi narrowed his eyes and seemed to think about what she'd said. Before he could speak, Su Heng spoke up. Boss, let me take her to school. I'm going to be taking the medicine to the Qin family anyway. Yun Shi thought about it and nodded. He can take me, no problem. Upon hearing her agree, Su Heng gloated. Boss, I never expected to be more popular than you. How rare. Mu Feiqi gave him an impatient glare. Hurry up and take her. Okay. Su Heng rarely saw the boss get rejected. He took the car keys, and, like a well-mannered gentleman, he opened the door for Yun Shi. After they drove down the mountain, Li Xilan turned to look at the brooding man next to her and asked warily, Boss, are you serious? Mu Feiqi glanced at her nonchalantly. What do you mean? That girl. Mu Feiqi remained impassive as he asked, what are you trying to verify? What do you mean by verify? All I want to know is what she means to you, young Marshal Mu. Today, young Marshal Mu had broken many precedents for the sake of that girl. She is going to be the future wife of the Mu family heir. In one sentence, he expressed his stance. And that girl's position in his heart. I know now. Nodding, Li Xilan felt somewhat surprised, but she also somewhat expected it. If the boss thinks she is the one, then she has to have the talent and competence to be worthy of you. It won't be easy being the wife of the Mu family heir. At the moment, she isn't yet strong enough to stand by your side. Therefore, you have to work hard. Li Xilan raised her eyebrows, her heavy eye makeup giving her an alluring air. She pursed her red lips. You better not pity her, boss. Mu Feiqi's eyes seemed to gleam. She is an ambitious girl. In the future, she will surpass you. Don't be so confident in her so early. If I break her, then that will be a slap in the face to you. Don't worry. I will leave the second mountain empty for you to train starting this Saturday. Mu Feiqi scoffed softly and haughtily turned around to go back into his mansion. How over the top. In order to train the girl, His Highness has really lost his mind. Li Xilan shook her head, then turned around and drove her car down the mountain. Outside Jingdu High School, Yun Shi got out of the car. She had made an appointment with Su Hang to go to his laboratory on Thursday afternoon. In exchange for him helping her with the medicine, she'd promised to reenact the emergency operation she'd done on the train for him. Both were medical enthusiasts. They wished that they had met each other sooner. They couldn't stop talking about medicine and pharmacology. Then stay safe, and I will wait for you across the street on Thursday. Okay. Thank you for helping me with this matter. Thank you for the medicine. No need to thank me, we should help each other. Chapter 88. An ostracized jinx. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 88. An ostracized jinx. Translator. Nyo-i.bo Studio Editor. Nyo-i.bo Studio. With help from memories from her previous life, Yun Shi located the Academic Affairs Office and reported her attendance to her homeroom teacher first. Teacher Su, her homeroom teacher, saw her, and then remembered orders from above to take special care of her, so he took her along to the classroom. It just so happened that the first class in the afternoon was his Chinese class. Teacher Su introduced the newly transferred Yun Shi to the class from the podium. Standing on the podium, Yun Shi glanced at the classroom nonchalantly and saw Liang Sini, as expected. Classes 1, 2, and 3 were all advanced classes. Yun Shi and Liang Sini were both transfer students and had been assigned to Class 3. Liang Sini had been busy making connections with people all over the classroom throughout the morning. While she did so, she was also throwing Yun Shi under the bus. She'd been spreading so much antipathy that when Yun Shi arrived in the classroom, everyone tacitly looked toward Liang Sini. There really were 2 transfer students in the class. All her classmates stared at her with bizarre expressions. With an impassive expression, Yun Shi stared at Liang Sini, who had an insufferably smug expression on her face. Teacher Su assigned her seating. Yang Lu, the new classmate Yun Shi will be sitting next to you. Teacher. Yang Luzhan stood up with an unhappy expression. Teacher, I don't want to sit at the same desk with her. Why? Students should help each other out, shouldn't they? It also depends on who it is. Her cousin said that she was a jinx. If she sits next to me and gives me bad luck, what should I do if I don't get into college? I don't want to sit at the same table with her. As a student in your junior year of high school, how can you be so superstitious? Learning depends on personal diligence and knowledge. If it really was such a supernatural process, you might as well go to the temple every day to burn incense and worship Buddha. I just don't want to sit with her. Yun Shi pursed her lips and turned to look at Teacher Su. Teacher, I will sit alone in the back row. The desks and chairs in the classroom were all in a row with 2 people per desk, so she wouldn't be affecting anyone by moving a desk to sit alone in the back. Are you nearsighted? Will you be able to see the blackboard from back there? No, I'm not nearsighted. I can see just fine. That's good. You can move a table to the end of the middle row. If the seating position isn't good enough, you can let me know. Thank you, teacher. Mu Feiqi had probably given him a heads up, so the teacher was especially courteous toward her. In this era, Power was a convenient thing to have no matter what industry one was in. After stepping down from the podium, Yunxi held a stack of new books and deliberately chose to walk past Liang Xini. She walked slowly with a bright smile on her face. The more she smiled, the more awkward it was for Liang Xini. However, she wasn't worried. Now that all the classmates knew that she was a jinx, everyone would stay far away from her. The feeling of being ostracized would be enough for her to bear. Moreover, she had her aunt to back her, so she didn't have to worry about being kicked out of the Yun family's house. On the other hand, this wretched girl was the one the entire family hated, and she had a myriad of chances to torment her. So what if the Chen family and the Jiang family backed her? Those sort of distinguished families valued luck the most. If they knew that she was a jinx, who would dare approach her in the future? She couldn't help but think about her aunt's plan. When she thought about how Yunxi would be sent back to the countryside soon, she couldn't help but rejoice. She had 3 classes in the afternoon. Because of Liang Xini's big mouth, everyone stayed far away from her after class, and no one dared to approach her area. Even the classmates who had to go out the back door went out of the way to exit from the front door, just to stay as far away from her as possible. The classmates ostracized her so unabashedly, but Yunxi didn't care and kept her head down as she skimmed through the new books she'd just received. Now that she'd been reborn, seeing these things once again felt so familiar yet distant at the same time. However, this did not affect her good mood. Everything had been reset, so she had many opportunities. In the last class session, Mr. Su issued a notice for the start of a school practice test. Chapter 89. 2 different statuses. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 89. 2 different statuses. Translator. Nyo-i.bo Studio Editor. Nyo-i.bo Studio. Students, this Friday will be the first practice exam. Everyone should review their knowledge. The entire grade will be ranked according to this exam. The top 30 will be rewarded by the school with a free tutoring class. This will be a good opportunity, and the teachers will help everyone with their work. Everyone, study hard for the test. The top 10 in this class should strive for a high score. As soon as the head teacher had informed them about this news, the class immediately started buzzing. This was no doubt a great opportunity. For those who got accepted into the advanced class, going to university was a given. Yunxi didn't have many expectations concerning this. She simply wanted to finish what she had set out to do. After returning home from work that evening, Yun Yuanfeng couldn't conceal his happiness. He seemed to be in a super good mood. That night, the entire family was eating dinner together in the villa complex. At dinner, in front of the entire family, Yunxi purposely asked her dad, "Dad, why are you so happy today? Have you had any good news?" She knew that the issues regarding Mr. Jiang had been resolved. Jiang Wanyun had called her earlier in the evening and thanked her for buying the medicine for her son. Her father answered, "Yunxi, I haven't forgotten that I have to thank you. If you hadn't asked Mrs. Chen for help, I'm afraid I wouldn't have gotten promoted this time." The trouble caused by Liang Xiuqin had to be settled by Yunxi. Although they said she was a jinx, it was obvious that that was just a silly superstition that they were promoting against her. Maybe this year her father was in luck. His jinx daughter had actually brought him good fortune. As soon as she'd returned, she'd helped him form ties with the Chen family and deal with the Jiang family, as well as taken care of other huge troubles for him. It seemed that his luck had finally arrived. Really? That's great. I hope Dad can take the seat of director this time, and no one will have to add a vice when they refer to you in the future. Nice. Nice. Ha ha ha. Yun Yuanfeng was so flattered that he was on cloud 9. Liang Xiuqin disdainfully watched the father and daughter bantering, and she snorted, "You're so experienced at being a goody two-shoes. You were the one who caused all the problems anyway, so it's only natural for you to help your dad resolve them." Liang Xiuqin had completely forgotten that she was the one who had offended Mr. Jiang in the first place. Now that the matter was resolved, she was trying to turn it around and make it seem like it had all been Yun Shi's fault. Yun Yuanfeng knew this clearly, but he didn't want to start trouble at this time, so he secretly glared at Liang Xiuqin as a warning for her to watch her mouth. Second Auntie Yaoying changed the topic with good timing and pulled out 2 invitations. By the way, the Chen family grandmother is holding a charity auction this weekend. I got an invitation from the third son. Who is going to go? These charity auctions held among the wealthy and famous were really just euphemisms. They could call them charity auctions if they wanted, but in reality they were simply venues for rich people to show off their money. Liang Xiuqin couldn't bear to look at Yaoying gloating, so she interjected with a disdainful expression on her face, everyone who received these invitations were people of status. You actually needed to get it from someone else, but we all got them delivered in person. With that said, Liang Xiuqin pulled out 3 invitations. Although they were obviously the same thing, in her eyes, having it sent to the door and picking it up yourself conferred 2 different statuses on them. Yun Shi raised her head and watched the cat fight between her mother and her second aunt. She had to bite her cheeks to suppress her laughter. Truthfully, she had no idea what made her mother think that she was in a position to antagonize her second aunt. Her second aunt's family was affluent and powerful, and she herself was a strong career woman who oversaw the operations of an entire pharmaceutical company. What had her mother ever accomplished? With the backing of her third uncle, she'd opened a therapeutic spa and usually spent her days chatting with socialites over tea, while trying to get favors from people everywhere. These sorts of superficial relationships wouldn't work in dire situations, and none of these people could ever be relied on. However, her mother was actually quite proud of these connections and felt as if she enjoyed good relations with all of Jingdu's upper-class ladies. But in their eyes, she was just an opportunistic nobody who was trying to social climb up to their level. Chapter 90. All bark and no bite. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 90. All bark and no bite. Translator. Nyo-i.bo Studio Editor. Nyo-i.bo Studio. Compared to her second aunt, who had used her career to establish her social status, her mother was pathetic. Every time she saw her mother mocking her aunt with a contemptuous tone, she realized that her mother really was dim-witted. It wasn't that her second aunt was a tolerant person, but rather, because they were on the same level, she considered it beneath her to bother arguing with Liang Xiuqin about it. However, the fact was, the more inferior that Liang Xiuqin's mocking made her feel, the more she liked to provoke and antagonize her back. Yaoying glanced at the invitations in Liang Xiuqin's hand and smiled as she put hers away. Second aunt, I also would like to go to the auction. I've never seen what an auction is like before. Can you take me there with you? Yun Shi suddenly spoke up, and Yaoying froze. Then she smiled and handed her an invitation. Okay, sure, I'll take you. It's good to see the outside world more. Yun Yuanfeng seemed to think of something and turned toward Liang Xiuqin. You take the 2 children also. Chilhan's academic work is difficult at this time. The first year of high school is a critical year. She should be staying at home to review her schoolwork. I will take Xiling and Sini there. Liang Xiuqin didn't ask Yun Chuhan's opinion and directly decided for her. Yun Chuhan pouted, her eyes darkened, and she lowered her head without speaking. Her mother's favoritism wasn't something new. It had been like this for more than a decade, so she wasn't surprised. However, her mother couldn't stop Yun Shi from going, so she was either planning on teaching her a lesson there or scheming against her. In the kind of place where all the wealthy and famous people gather, whether or not her mother succeeded or failed, if Yun Shi suffered misfortune, the entire Yun family would be implicated. But her mother was always the one digging her own grave. Yun Shi was beyond caring. At this point, it had nothing to do with her. Liang Xiuqin, Yun Xiling, and Liang Sini spent all their time and energy fighting their own kin. As for their mutual destruction, with Yun Xiling and Liang Xinyi's small brains, it wouldn't be difficult to finish them off. Yun Shi raised her eyes to glance at Yun Chuhan and understood the resentful expression on her face. The relationship between her mother and Yun Chuhan was a tense one that had been slowly building up throughout the years. Yun Shi didn't even need to do anything, because it was going to blow up eventually. Yun Chuhan was smarter than Yun Xiling, and she also understood the importance of being subtle. As the saying goes, all bark and no bite. On Thursday afternoon, Yun Shi only had 2 classes. After they'd ended, Yun Shi slipped away with her books. Liang Xinyi remained in the classroom trying to social climb, and she didn't pay any attention to where Yun Shi had gone. After arriving at the agreed place, Yun Shi stared at the familiar license plate and stepped forward to knock on the window of the passenger seat. The window of the passenger seat slowly lowered, but the person who had come to pick her up was not Su Hang, but instead young Marshal Mu, who she had recently stood up. She'd promised to climb out her window one night and go up to the mountain to find him, then run back in the morning. But she'd forgotten about it, and, frankly, she didn't care about it at all. But she didn't expect that he would come directly to find her. From where she was standing, she could see his angular profile, his haughty countenance, and his sophisticated air. Chilly air seemed to blow into her face. It was already autumn, and Yun Shi couldn't help but shiver. "Young Marshal Mu, why are you here? Get in the car," the man in the driver's seat murmured. Yun Shi froze for a moment, then frowned slightly. "If Su Hang is not available, then I will go home." The face of the man in the car suddenly darkened, his forehead seemed to twitch, and his cold eyes glanced at her. "Either you get in the car yourself, or I will come around and grab you. You choose." Yun Shi thought about it for a moment, and, in the end, she had no other choice but to relent. God knew what outrageous thing he would do otherwise. As soon she'd sat down, before she could even buckle her seatbelt, the car sped away. Yun Shi frowned as she stared at the man in the driver's seat. Perhaps he had a couple tons of gunpowder. The car drove out of the downtown area and all the way to some scenic spot on the outskirts of town. Ginkgo trees were planted all around and sprinkled the ground golden. The car gradually slowed down, but neither of them spoke. Yun Shi turned her head, and she suddenly discovered that Mu Feiqi had a mature and steady presence when actually driving. In her last life, Han Yao Tian had always been arrogant when driving. But Mu Feiqi was different. The vibe he gave off intimidated people from acting too casually in front of him. For a while, as if she was dazed by his profile, she felt somewhat as if she had fallen into a trance.